The following review contains significant plot spoilers. Please watch at your own risk.
Where is she?
Ah, yes. A fatal weakness. Room off. Bring her in. Lovely girl. Tastes like strawberries.
I wouldn't know.
I would. So, back where we started, James. Your friend or the mission? Drop the gun and let her live.
Arumov, what has this Cossack promised you? You knew, didn't you? He's a Lian's Cossack.
It's in the past.
He'll betray you! Just like everyone else.
This is true. What's true is that in 48 hours, you and I will have more money than God. And Mr. Bond here will have a small memorial service, with only Moneypenny and a few tearful restaurateurs in attendance. So, what's the choice, James? 2 targets? Time enough for 1 shot. The girl, the mission.
Kill her. She means nothing to me.
See you in hell, James.
One inch armor plating.
After the release of License to Kill, the James Bond film series was put on hiatus due to various legal disputes, which I won't get into here. Production was supposed to begin in 1990 on the next Bond film, rumored to be titled The Property of a Lady, taken from one of Ian Fleming's short stories. It was also supposed to star Timothy Dalton in his 3rd outing as James Bond. This idea never came to be due to the disputes, and in 1994 Timothy Dalton announced that he had resigned from the role. The producers at Eon eventually settled the disputes and managed to get Pierce Brosnan to be the next James Bond. GoldenEye is the 17th official Bond film and was released in 1995, starring Pierce Brosnan as James Bond 007. The film opens up with a slick-looking gun barrel sequence featuring, of course, Pierce Brosnan. The music used in this particular gun barrel is almost entirely unique and is inspired by electronic music. Despite how drastically different it sounds, it has grown on me over the years. After the gun barrel, we get the pre-title sequence, which shows Bond on a mission in Arkhangelsk, Russia. We get an incredible bungee jump stunt, and Bond meets up with fellow 00 agent Alec Trevelyan, aka 006, played by Sean Bean. The two infiltrate a Soviet chemical weapons facility in an attempt to plant explosive charges. In the process, they are compromised and 006 is shot and killed by a high-ranking Soviet officer named Arkady Orumov, played by Gottfried John. Bond manages to destroy the facility and escapes in an airplane. After this PTS, we get the title song sung by Tina Turner. I wasn't a fan of the song when I was a kid, but now I have learned to like it. After the song, we flash forward 9 years later in Monte Carlo, where Bond is investigating a suspected member of the Yanis crime syndicate, Xenia Onatop, played by Famke Janssen. During his time in Monte Carlo, Bond noticed a demonstration of a prototype helicopter that can withstand an electromagnetic pulse, taking place on a frigate. Xenia and Orumov steal the helicopter, posing as pilots during the demonstration, while Bond has no choice but to let it happen. Meanwhile, Xenia and Orumov fly the helicopter to a bunker in Severnaya, Russia, where they massacre the computer staff working there and steal the control disk for the GoldenEye satellite weapons. They program one of the GoldenEye satellites to destroy the complex with an electromagnetic pulse and escape with programmer Boris Grushenko, played by Alan Cumming. Natalia Simonova, played by Isabella Scorupco, the lone survivor, contacts Boris and arranges a meeting in St. Petersburg where he betrays her to Giannis. Back in London, M, played by Judi Dench, assigns Bond to investigate the attack. Bond flies to St. Petersburg where he meets CIA agent Jack Wade, played by Jodan Baker, who sets up a meeting between Bond and Valentin Zukowski manages to set up a meeting between Bond and Yanis at a deserted statue park. When Bond gets there, he meets Yanis, who turns out to be none other than 006 Alec Trevelyan, who is now badly scarred from the explosion at Arkhangelsk. Alec explains to Bond how he faked his death and how his parents were betrayed by the British during World War II because they were Cossacks. After a brief confrontation, Bond is tranquilized and put into the electromagnetic-hardened helicopter, where he awakens and finds that Natalia is also in it. The two manage to escape due to Bond's wits, but are immediately arrested by Russian police and brought to the military archives, where they meet Russian Minister of Defense Dmitry Mishkin, played by Jackie Cario. Mishkin interrogates Bond and Natalia and finds out that Ourumov is a traitor. Before he can act, Ourumov enters the room and kills Mishkin. During this time, Bond and Natalia attempt to escape from the archives, but Natalia is captured and dragged into a car by Ourumov. Bond steals a tank, yes, a freaking tank, and pursues Ourumov through the streets of St. Petersburg until Ourumov leads him to Alec's armored train. Bond derails the train and confronts Alec, Xenia, and Ourumov. After this very tense scene, Bond manages to quickly kill Ourumov, rescuing Natalia, while Alec and Xenia escape and lock the two inside the train with a bomb. Natalia locates Boris's satellite dish in Cuba while Bond uses his watch's laser to cut through the floor. The two escape just before the train explodes and decide to travel to Cuba to stop Alec. Bond and Natalia do some reconnaissance in an airplane but are shot down while flying over a Cuban jungle. As they stumble out of the wreckage, Xenia rappels down from a helicopter and attacks Bond. After a brief fight, Bond shoots down the helicopter, causing Xenia to be hoisted up and crushed against a tree, killing her. Bond and Natalia then watch a lake being drained of water, uncovering a satellite dish. They infiltrate the control station below the lake, but Bond ends up being captured. Alec reveals his plan to steal money from the Bank of England before erasing all of its financial records with the remaining GoldenEye, concealing the theft and destroying Britain's economy. Meanwhile, Natalia programs the satellite to initiate re-entry and destroy itself. As Alec captures Natalia and orders Boris to save the satellite, Bond triggers an explosion with his pen grenade and escapes to the antenna cradle. Bond sabotages the antenna, preventing Boris from regaining control of the satellite, before having a brutal fight with Alec. The two eventually end up on the antenna platform, hundreds of feet above the dish, when Bond gains the upper hand and drops Alec off of the cradle. Natalia steals a helicopter and rescues Bond from the cradle as it explodes, resulting in the deaths of both Alec and Boris. The film ends with Bond and Natalia being rescued by Jack Wade and a team of Marines. Now let's talk about Pierce Brosnan. The first Bond I ever saw was Pierce Brosnan. At first I thought he was the only James Bond, that is until I saw For Your Eyes Only starring Roger Moore. Due to Pierce being the first Bond that I was exposed to, you'd think that he'd be my favorite. This isn't the case with me. When I was a kid he was my favorite, but now that I'm an adult, I can see many flaws with his portrayal as Bond. This doesn't mean that he's really bad, because he isn't. I guess overrated could be the correct term to use. Brosnan attempts to create a hybrid Bond with the toughness of Connery, occasional seriousness of Dalton, and the comedic one-liners of Moore. While this may sound like a dream Bond, it sounds all too good to be true. I feel that Brosnan handles the serious scenes very well and the comedic ones not so much. Many people will probably disagree with this. Brosnan is also sometimes known as the Terminator Bond because it never seems like he is in real danger, and he fires off so many machine guns that it gets a little bit ridiculous sometimes. These faults aren't very noticeable in this film, but are in his later films. Overall, Brosnan gives a great, although overrated, portrayal of Bond, and ends up being my third favorite Bond actor, behind Connery and Dalton. The main villain of the film is Alec Trevelyan, aka 006, played by Sean Bean. I'm a big fan of Bean, so it's only natural that I like his portrayal as the villain, right? Well, yeah, and in fact 006 is my favorite villain in the entire series. It's an awesome idea that Bond has to face his former friend and fellow 00 agent, and it's pulled off well for the most part. They never really explain exactly how he faked his death, so it's left up to interpretation, which is kind of annoying. Overall, though, the character is great and definitely physically intimidating. M and Moneypenny return being played by new actors Judi Dench and Samantha Bond respectively, while Q returns being yet again played by the legendary Desmond Llewellyn. All three characters receive classic scenes, which is very nice, and the M being a woman is a fresh and cool idea. Judi Dench plays M very well and gets straight to the point with the character. Dench's portrayal of M is my second favorite, behind of course the legendary Bernard Lee. Samantha Bond also does a good job of being the new Moneypenny, and ends up being my second favorite portrayal of the character, behind Lois Maxwell. Our two allies in this film are Jack Wade and Valentin Zukovsky. Joe Don Baker plays Jack Wade, and he looks a bit familiar, doesn't he? That's because he played Brad Whitaker, one of the two main villains from 1987's The Living Daylights. Baker does a much better job of playing a good guy than he does a bad guy, and it shows greatly here. Robbie Coltrane, who many young people may know as Hagrid from the Harry Potter series, plays Zukovsky and does a great job of playing a reluctant ally. I'm a big fan of Coltrane, so it's only natural that he is one of my favorite allies in the series. There are a few henchmen / henchwomen in this film, and all of them really stand out, which is a pretty rare occurrence in a Bond film. Famke Janssen is smoking hot and ends up being the best femme fatale since Fiona Volpe from 1965's Thunderball. She has a slightly over-the-top gimmick where she kills people by crushing them with her thighs, but in all honesty I can look past it. Alan Cumming gives a great geeky portrayal as expert programmer Boris Grushenko, and ends up being one of the most awkward yet memorable henchmen in the entire series. His demise where he is cryogenically frozen is pretty cheesy though. And then we have General Orlov, who seems to be a much better version of General Orlov from 1983's Octopussy. Orlov easily makes my top 5 list of henchmen, mainly because of how unintentionally awesome he is. He has many great lines and ends up being a memorable bad guy. His death scene is kinda weak though. Blink and you'll miss it. Last of all, we get a phenomenal main Bond girl who happens to be my favorite one in the entire series. I am talking, of course, about Natalia, played by gorgeous Polish actress Izabela Skorupko. She is a strong character who actually even manages to help Bond out on a few sticky situations. Skorupko's acting is also top-notch, which adds even more to the character. Martin Campbell cops in the director's seat for this film and does a phenomenal job. Campbell would also prove later in the franchise that lightning could strike gold twice. You'll see what I mean in a few weeks. Eric Serra is the composer in this film, and uses mostly synthesizers to create the music. This proved to be controversial with many fans who noticed that it lacked Bondian elements. I myself am a big fan of the track called the GoldenEye Overture, which plays during the PTS. I can honestly say though that other than that, the score is pretty lackluster and questionable, like in one scene where Bond and Xenia are driving their cars and some cheesy music plays in the background. The main plot in the film is pretty interesting with the GoldenEye weapons and the like. The villain's motivation is also interesting. This is the first Bond film to take place after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they handled the relevance of James Bond pretty well. I always like to think of this film as the first of the modern Bonds due to the increased emphasis on action and technology. The action sequences in this film are incredible, such as the entire PTS, the archives and tank chase, and of course the finale on the cradle. The sets in this film are also extravagant and very appealing. The locations in this film are also an improvement over the last few films, with places like Russia, Monte Carlo, and Cuba. GoldenEye came out at the right time when people thought that the James Bond franchise was dead in the water. The film grossed $3.5 million in the US alone, and became the most successful Bond film at that point, surpassing Moonraker. While I would have preferred another Dalton film, GoldenEye is most definitely an incredible Bond film with only a few flaws that prevent me from giving it a perfect score. If you are looking to get into the James Bond film series, this one is highly recommended to watch first. I give GoldenEye a 9 out of 10. As per usual, I will now go over my likes and dislikes. Sean Bean as Alec Trevelyan makes what is possibly the best Bond villain of all time. Izabela Skorupko as Natalia is also possibly the best Bond girl in the series. Robbie Coltrane as Valentin Zukovsky makes a very memorable and badass ally. Judi Dench as M brings a whole new and much-needed edge to the character. And lastly, there are many memorable action set pieces that really stand out. And now for my dislikes. Boris's death scene is kinda cheesy and silly. The explanation behind how Alec faked his death isn't explained too well. The emphasis on more action kind of takes away what the character of James Bond is all about. Eric Serra's score is for the most part pretty terrible. And lastly, while Pierce Brosnan makes a pretty decent Bond, I would have liked to see Timothy Dalton in this film instead. We're already into October, which means that Skyfall is merely over a month away. Stay tuned for next week when we review the next Bond film in this franchise. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.